This Shia is Le'ili Nishmas Chana Tzivya Bas Ephraim Zalman Gordon. That was my grandmother. Her yahrzeit is the first day of Pesach. And also for my wife's grandmother, Mabel Bas Avram. I would like to talk a little bit about the author of the Sefer, the author of the book Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. As it's known, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is one of the most popular halacha books in the last 150 years. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch was written by Reb Shlomo Gansfried. He was born in 1804, and his Kitzur Shulchan Aruch he printed in 1864. Reb Shlomo Gansfried was born in Ungva, and he was a dayan in Ungva, a rabbinical judge in Ungva. Now, what made Kitzur Shulchan Aruch so popular was, what he did was, we know that the Shulchan Aruch itself, that was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, with the glosses of, with the additions of the Ramosha Isilis, that was printed 400 years ago, made a great revolution in the Jewish world. Because basically, if you had to know halacha, where were you going to look it up? Here, he took all the halachas, made it, as it's called Shulchan Aruch, a prepared table, and made it in a nice way that you could be able to find halacha very easily. But even with the Shulchan Aruch, it takes a long time to learn the Shulchan Aruch. So what Reb Shlomo Gansfried did in his kitzur was, he made an abridged version, a condensed version of the Shulchan Aruch, where every layman, any person, could have a general idea of the Shulchan Aruch and all the basic halachas that are written in the Shulchan Aruch. And ever since he printed it, even during his lifetime, it was printed in numerous editions, and it's been translated into many languages, and it's become a classic for homes, for schools, for educators, for anyone who wants to have a general idea of halacha. So I would highly recommend people who want to really understand Jewish law to buy the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and especially the latest edition, the Kleiman edition that came out by ArtScroll, because besides the fact that they reprinted the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, they also bring from the latest poskim, the latest halachic decisors, especially the Mishnah Berurah from the Holy Chafetz Chaim, who is also very popular among the Torah world, and also they bring the rulings of Rav Moshe Feinstein. The first day of Pesach, this year will be her first year outside. I'm going to talk about the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, and in today's day and age, how it developed to what we have today. When the Shulchan Aruch was first written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived in Tzfas, it made a revolution in the Torah world. Now, before Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch is basically, as it's named, a prepared table. It makes it very easy for people to find the halacha and to know what to do. So before the Shulchan Aruch, there was the Torah, written by Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Rabbeinu Asher the Rosh, and he also made a kind of Shulchan Aruch to be able to find halacha. But the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, wanted it to be more clear what the rulings are. So he came out with the Shulchan Aruch known as the prepared table. While he was working on his work in Krakow, my ancestor, the Ramosha Isilis, also thought of an idea of writing a Shulchan Aruch, that people should know the halacha, what to do. When he saw Rabbi Yosef Karo's book came out, he said that someone has worked on it already. So he figured what he's going to do is, he's going to add wherever Ashkenazim differ. So originally his commentary was called the Mapel, like a tablecloth. Just like on a prepared table, you have a tablecloth. So he wrote glosses and commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch where Ashkenazim differ. So once Shulchan Aruch came out, that the Beis Yosef wrote with the Ramah's commentary, that became the authoritative book on halacha for both the Svadim and for Ashkenazim. So as time went by, even we had the Shulchan Aruch, but on the Shulchan Aruch there were other commentaries written. There was the Magen Avraham, there was the Torah Zuav, and more halachas developed as time went on. So you had the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shnai Zalman of Ladi, who was the head of the Chabad movement, the Lubavitch movement, who his teacher, Reb Dov Ber Mezrich, a student of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidim, told him that maybe write a Shulchan Aruch that would take even all the later halachas and make it more accessible for the public. So that's when the Alter Rebbe came out with the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. As time went by, there was a rabbi whose name was Reb Shlomo Ganzfried. He published in 1864 the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Now, what he came up with was this idea that even though we have the Shulchan Aruch, but a layman, if you want him to know all the halachas, you have to take the Shulchan Aruch and kind of condense it. That they should get a general idea of the halacha, and later when they have different questions, they can ask a rabbi, look at the biggest Shulchan Aruch. But he wanted something that people should have a general idea, because in order to ask a halacha question, people have to have a knowledge of the basics. So he figured, I'm going to make a sefer that has the basics of halacha, and he called it the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And it became extremely popular. Now later, there was a different rabbi known as the Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meyer Kagan, and he published the Mishnah Berurah, and that became very authoritative. And today in the yeshiva world, and in general, it's accepted as very authoritative. So he also took the Shulchan Aruch, but he wrote a commentary on it with the reasons behind it to be easy for people who want to know the reason behind the halach and not to have to look it up in the Shulchan Aruch if they don't have time. So this was very good for the Ashkenazim. But what were the Sfadim going to do? Where were the Sfadim going to have a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? So as we know, in the last century, Rabbi Avadi Yosef was the leading authority for Sephardic Jewry. So his son, the current chief rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, took his father's rulings, and he also condensed it into 2 volumes known as Yalkut Yosef. He first published a whole big set of more of his father's rulings, but in Yalkut Yosef is like the Sephardic Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And I think they're working on it to translate into English. So if you're an Ashkenazi and you would like to have just a condensed version, try finding the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Today they publish already the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch with glosses of the Alter Rebbe, with Alter Rebbe difference from what it says in the Kitzur, and with the Mishnah Berurah's opinions, also with they connected it to the Kitzur, and Moshe's opinions. And if you're Sephardic, you can buy the Yalkut Yosef. But whatever you do, like I tell a lot of people, buy either Kitzur or the Yalkut Yosef, any book on halacha, because if you want to know anything about Judaism, the key to knowing it is to have a firm grounding in halacha. If you have a firm grounding in halacha, it makes things much easier, and that is the fundament of Judaism. So thank you, and I wish you all a kosher and happy Pesach. Now I'll do a mini review. Around 400 years ago, Rabbi Yosef Karo printed the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch means the prepared table. That he put on all the halachas that apply today, and that's required to know. On the Shulchan Aruch, there was printed glosses of the Ramah where Ashkenazim differ. But even though after this monumental work of the Shulchan Aruch, a lot of commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch came later, and it was important to have a condensed version. So before there was a condensed version, the Alter Rebbe wrote a Shulchan Aruch for Chabad Chassidim and for general Chassidim known as the Shulchan Aruch Harav. It was under the guidance of his teacher, the Magd of Medrash, who told him to write that Shulchan Aruch. So that Shulchan Aruch is very authoritative for Chabad and for the general Chassidim. It also later in 1864, Reb Shlomo Ganzfried printed the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, where he condensed it and made it that even for the layman to be able to understand, and that's the Ashkenazi version of the Shulchan Aruch in a condensed version. Later in Israel, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, the son of Rabbi Avadi Yosef, made also a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in 2 volumes known as Yalkut Yosef.